You can build the most accurate model, but if your users don't understand how it works or weren't included in the development, you lose them. There's been test cases that I've dived into to kind of unpack this and like, why did this go wrong? The post-mortem is trust was missing or people weren't included. So I think that's a really big thing.
Welcome back to Tech Teams Today. Today's guest is someone who's worked on everything from AI infrastructure on Wall Street to multilingual price crawlers for global consumers, and most recently, machine learning systems for healthcare. John Van Vranken is the CTO at MPC Solutions with previous leadership roles at Canoe Intelligence, Nucleus Healthcare, and PriceX. He's built and led globally distributed teams, scaled ML pipelines, and architected microservices from scratch, all while staying close to the code. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's dive in. You've worked on AI systems in both finance and healthcare. What would you say is the key to building systems that are both high performing and trusted?
Yeah, I love that you use the word trusted there because I feel like that is the crux of everything, especially when you're, I feel like that is the crux of everything, especially when you're developing these systems. You can build the most accurate model, but if your users don't understand how it works or weren't included in the development, you lose them. And, there's been test cases that I've dived into to kind of unpack this and like, why did this go wrong? And the post-mortem is trust was missing or people weren't included. So I think that's a really big thing. You have to bring people along for the journey if they're going to trust it. So, that's a pivotal thing when you're developing something that they're maybe scared of. It's new, something they're, especially with AI, right? We're changing the way that they work. So, they're going to go into it with all sorts of reservation. But if you bring them into it and they understand how it's being built, they get their say into, hey, you should probably include this variable, that one, not so much. And then give feedback on how to tune it and make it just right. Once it goes into production, they're just as proud as you are, which is amazing. Versus, I'm going to sit here on my own as an AI engineer, just bang it out, and they're going to be like, "What is this?" So that's kind of the ethos there. But also like no one person has all the answers, and it does. Just like in AI, we gather all the information, but also we need all the people. And if we can bring that in.
Yeah, so just including as many stakeholders as possible. So you work in really high stakes environments, right? So finance, healthcare, everyone wants to use machine learning and AI. When would you say are maybe some instances where probably companies should not be using machine learning?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely many times because it can always go south or you don't have the best data. So in that case, you would want to look for human judgment, right? And that struggles to scale. And how would you kind of manage those edge cases? So you can solve it with basic queries. You can rule-based engines. You don't need to boil the ocean, so to speak, to solve problems in the world. So that's, ML amplifies what's already there, but, your inputs are messy and could be misunderstood. And it's also something you have to kind of keep stoking the fire with. Rule-based systems have been in place for decades and decades, and they work pretty well. So you need to kind of know what tool you're going to be tackling your problem with and being mindful that just because you know that you can make this cool neural network with a transformer doesn't mean you should be using it, to do everything. There's simpler ways to do things, and obviously more higher performance. If you can make it simpler, the better. So it's always that give and take.
Yeah,
But once you do have a complex problem, everyone's banging their head against the wall. All right, now we're talking. Now we can start thinking about embedding, some sort of machine learning model so we can help them out.
And I'm curious, what do you think non-technical stakeholders often misunderstand about integrating AI into regulated environments like banking, finance, healthcare?
It's a it's a great question. I've seen this in a couple different areas, even the legal profession. I don't have anything in my resume for the legal department, but my fiance works there, and she's been, doing the same thing, trying to fold it in, and it's really hard to convince stakeholders who are like, "Hey, I know how this business runs, and okay, AI, it's cool, it's a buzzword, but we don't need to use it, or I don't think I can trust it, or just like that whole, I guess, headwind that comes from that, or the inertia just isn't there. So it's important as a leader to be open to some of it and be like, hey, you know what? Let's put together a POC. Let's just try it out, rather than I don't know, and try to kick back. Kicking back at progress, it's a dangerous game to play.
Yeah, and there are always sort of those people. I remember in the mid 2010s, I was working at a cloud company, and I went up to a CTO and I was like, "Hey, what's your cloud migration plan?" And he's like, "The cloud, he's over my dead body. We will be on
Yeah.
prem forever." And I was like,
Yep.
"Huh, that
Yeah.
was a long time ago." And I guarantee you, they're on the cloud now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, certain things don't age well, and yeah, and you have to be a little bit open. Like, even if it's not your preference, or you don't even know anything about it, that's not to say it's not a good idea. It's not something to explore. So it takes, kind of a unique leader to say, you know what, we're going to give it a try, and that's okay. But obviously, you kind of, time box it. You put it in its corner and make sure that it's delivering something of value before you go forward. That would be my take on industries that are still apprehensive
All right.
of embracing this. We see it all too often, and it's, yeah, frustrating.
So shifting gears a little bit, getting a little technical here. So at Canoe, you migrated from a monolith to a service-oriented architecture, an SOA. What made that transition successful, and where do you think teams usually go wrong during that migration?
Yeah, migrating is always difficult. Going to microservices, has its pros, has its cons. There's certain companies that can absorb that. I would say, at that particular position, they had a really good DevOps team, so we knew we could handle all those individual services, and the microservices coordination and all of that. In a startup, it's like, well, that's added complexity. And do we need to think about that noise, or do we just focus on our business, and what we want out of this business before we go and add that layer of complication? But I would say, yeah, the team challenge there is pretty hard. And right now, we're working on a company where we're pivoting literally everything. So I got here about a year and a half ago, and looked at the source code and said, you know what, this isn't gonna sustain. This is not great. And then you looked at the infrastructure and you're like, well, I mean, everything just worked. And that was a testament, to the people that built it. I'm always, whenever I come into a new space, you'll have to realize what the good things are. Somebody spent a lot of time building something that worked, but was it done the right way? Not so much. That's one of the, as a software engineer, it's just like, well, now we're turning the corner. We're going from early startup where everything was on a shoestring. The company didn't really know the direction. It shifted like slightly several times. So certain things were built that aren't being used. Database schemas were, all kind of all over the place. And then you go forward with intent and say, here's what we're going to be doing, and here's the architecture we're going to be using, and here's what needs to happen next. So those are kind of the from a team standpoint, it's hard for any human to do change. However, I always ask, but we're engineers. We're here to do that change. So you kind of have to get over your own personal like fear and say, all right, kill your
Right.
darlings, or time to move on, open to the challenge. So we kind of do that, and it's also important if you do have a team that is going through that change. I think they also feel a little bit threatened. Okay, you're going to be doing all these technology things that I don't know anything about. Am I going to lose my job? Like everything starts rushing through people's heads. So as a leader, it's really great to say, let's slow down. The reason why you're here is because you are the people that can do this. Maybe not today, but you're here because you're here. And we see promise in what you can do, not what you've done. I mean, that's great, but what you can do.
Yeah.
And move forward
It's
with that.
it's not just a snapshot of what are they capable of right now. It's what can they be capable of in a year, 2 years down the line. And if they have
Right.
to learn new languages and frameworks and technology, then that's the name of the game in 2025. You can't really
Right.
be, and I remember engineers like this in the 2010s of like, I've been doing this for 25 years. I've been writing with this language and this framework, and I'm never changing to anything else. And I wonder what those engineers are up to nowadays, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's always a place for the COBOL guy, uh, or woman
Yeah.
that there's going to be those legacy apps that need care and feeding. But at the end of the day, yeah, that's probably not why we joined this whole
Right.
industry. And when we signed up, we were like, well, I don't know. It's like, especially the computer science field and where it's been in the last 30 years. It's like, it's exciting, it's new, it's different. It's, something that we can bite into, even if we, don't understand, let's say, a more, robust industry like legal field. All right, that's been going on forever. I'll have to learn all that stuff. It's a little more free, and I think that's what brings in a lot of people to the discipline, but you can't forget it.
Yeah.
You always need that lifelong learner, and continue to learn, and be open to new ideas.
So you used domain-driven design, hexagonal architecture, Kafka and Python microservices. Which of those architectural decisions would you say paid off most?
Well, I got my start about 23 years ago, so half those things didn't exist back then, and also got into web apps, which were driven by PHP. And back then, you couldn't even, even though I'd been trained with, I think, C++, you couldn't write the word class. Like even that was like they didn't have classes. It was ridiculous. So to go from that and then to see the progress of all the languages kind of coming together, what we so all the languages coming together, what we've kind of seen is a confluence of best practices. So, oh, I love Java. Okay, why? Or what are the best things about Java? And then the other community starts to pull that in, and that's great to see. So basically, it just comes down to best practices. Doesn't matter what language you're using. So domain-driven design is one of my favorites. It's Martin Fowler has spoken highly of it. It came about through basically a white room exercise where I had to rewrite my own work, and I didn't know how I could rewrite it without stepping on legal parameters. So the idea was, I just did like this big introspective thought, and I think this is it's maybe 2015, 16, something right around there. And I was like, well, what's a better way to do what I've always done? And so I just did a bunch of research. I found out, about hexagonal architecture, clean architecture, domain-driven design, all these, new emerging things that, are great regardless of language, and just started trying it. And to be honest, at the beginning, it really wasn't great. It took a lot more time. I was frustrated. It didn't work. And then it's like that moment, then it clicks.
That's
And
always a great moment.
and and you're just like, oh my gosh. And then you see the scalability, right? You see how everything's so simple and testable. And so what we see a lot of times with software applications is as time goes on, the complexity gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Tech debt piles up, and it just gets harder to work in new features to the application. What I love about domain-driven design and the architecture we've chosen is actually gets, I won't say simpler over time. I would say just kind of flatlines. So there's this big up curve where you have to, you create all the things in the architecture. But once you do, adding new things is easier because you have like an abundance of resources to pull from, and it's all very testable and maintainable. So yeah, it's one of my favorites, but it took a lot of hardship to get to that point, I will say. But that's the nature of the beast.
Yeah.
And
Anything that's worth it usually is. What are some practical ways engineering leaders can balance velocity and security, especially when leading remote teams?
yeah, so I would say as far as automated testing is probably the number one. To make sure that you have a testing framework that can stand up and capture anything that might go wrong, but also it's not just about unit tests. It's not just about integrated tests. It's also about security tests, and then factoring those into your CI/CD pipeline is a pretty great thing to do, because then we can be moving fast and we can be deploying quickly, but we're not worried based on, we know it had to go through a gauntlet of tests and a gauntlet of different gateways and things that said it's good to go. So it's important to make sure that you've got a good QA team, a good automation team that can put that together, and that makes a huge difference, I will say, and also lets you sleep at night as a bonus.
Yeah, for sure. So zooming out from the technical piece and going into sort of teams and culture, you've built and led international teams across Europe and the US. Sort of, how do you ensure cultural cohesion across borders and oceans in this case?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I have a little bit of, I would say, ability to connect with anybody who's remote. I started as my remote work in 2005, before it was cool, like before COVID hit, right? So way back then, I wanted to move to Europe. Asked my boss, it's like, hey, I met this girl. I want to move out to Europe, and he's like, nope, we can't. I go, okay. And then so I asked him the next day. He's like, I think this was a Friday. And he goes, well, let me think about it over the weekend. Okay. And then so he says, okay. And that kicked off a 6 long-year span where I worked remotely from Europe in the US. Back at my US job, it was the same team I've known for years. I was just sitting in a different seat. But it was also neat. The one requirement was that I had to work US hours. So my day started at 3 p.m. and ended at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
And that's if you just do your 9 to 5, right?
Yeah,
Like if
right.
stuff's going wrong, okay, yeah, we're going to 1, we're going to 2. It gets, but that's but it also allowed me to really not only connect with other remote workers, but from a personal side, it was great. I brought my bike. I think I rode around Europe, between those hours of when you wake up and 3. I did a lot of cycling, and just beautiful countryside, whether it's the Pyrenees, the Alps, and just like random parts in between, and just like finding these small towns and kind of learning about their culture, right? Because it reflects back to business culture as well. You have to be quiet. You have to recognize. You have to see what's going on before you actually act. So it was kind of my own personal journey, but yeah. Now that I'm back here in the States, we do have a few remote employees, and I feel like that helps me to understand, what they're going through, and try to set them up for doing their best work.
So going deeper into that, what are some of your go-to signals when hiring remote engineers?
Well, as somebody who does have a AI degree. I will say we all have biases, personally. So, but personally, what I look for is some, not necessarily like, do you check all the boxes that we're looking for? We see it all the time in, job postings. It'll say must be great at this, and this, and this. And like, 2 years of experience in, XYZ when XYZ came out literally 2 years ago.
Right.
So it's like, that's a big ask, right? But so what we're really looking for is somebody that can take ownership, and have that ability to learn on their own. So anytime they've learned something, I want to make sure they're, lifelong learners and show a history of that, whether it's technology or anything else, like maybe they learned woodworking or maybe they, dived into some other hobby recently. That shows me like, okay, they're open, they're, adventurous, they're open to the nebulous of, what is to come. And that's a big thing. So intrinsic motivation, right?
Yeah.
So that's I love that one. And it's like you can each person is different in evaluating their intrinsic motivation, but if they've have at least one example of that, that tells me a lot. So let's see. So for remote workers too, we do like to see great communication skills. Not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily need to be like, English first and perfect language, but because a lot of our work is actually done through, text, right? We give a review of something and we post something on Slack or the Jira tickets or any sort of thing like that. So it's not necessarily that their language needs to be perfect. It's always nice if it is, but really it's just how do you formulate your thought process when you're communicating? And
Yeah.
that's kind of a big one. Because I know it can be, even though, I lived abroad for a while, a lot of the guys and women on the team haven't, so I want to be mindful of that as well, to make sure that it's going to be a good team fit.
So diving a little deeper into that, you've grown teams from literally to 10x that. What's sort of your mental model for hiring when you're scaling at that kind of rate?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say, early hires are multipliers. You have to have that bias towards adaptability. And one of the things that we've been doing currently is we recognize that as a startup, we had a lot of junior people who kind of formulated the company, which, it's shoestring budgets, you get it. But once you cross that threshold and say, okay, now we're playing with the big boys, what do we do now? And how do we get from, shoestring to big time? So, the thought process that I have personally is I want to see, everything has to come slowly but methodically. So it is one pillar at every discipline. So we seek out the best person as a pillar and they own their work. They have autonomy, and make sure that we can convey all of that, which is really, a great opportunity for them, but it's also a great opportunity for the company because now we have, we moved from a junior person to somebody with 20 years of experience, right? And maybe they start out and they don't have too many people under them. Maybe it's one, maybe it's two, but then growth occurs, and then we can start spending the time about growing people up, from a junior to get that. But you can't get there without that kind of influence in the pillar at each discipline. So, talking about software development, talking about DevOps, talking about security, talking about um, QA. Each of those um, is a very kind of evolving to become a very complex discipline. Each of
Right.
No one person's going to be able to handle it. So you got to have the kind of the experts in the room, and then you're poised for growth, and you're poised to new things to come. So yeah, that's kind of my mentality around growing teams. So it just kind of fills in organically after that. Um, but
Yeah, my I remember my first CTO. I originally joined as an engineer. Basically, I was being tested as an engineer with the goal of being a product manager once I sort of passed the tests, right? So
okay,
everyone started as an IC. Um, so and his thing was, all right, so you're a PHP developer, but you're not writing PHP. We're actually going to give you a Backbone JS project, and then let's see how you do with that. You're not allowed to use any extensions or jQuery or any JS libraries. Then once, oh, you finished that? Okay. Now you're going over to database design and you're working in Navicat all day. So you like
right,
basically go around, oh, now you're in DevOps, so once you like sort of
right,
made the rounds to all the different squads, he was like, you're now
yeah,
anointed product manager. You have to sort of put in the work and show all those teams that you'll figure it out, you'll learn, you'll adapt, and then you can be an effective leader rather than just
right.
starting out as, hey, this guy's our new product manager, on day one. I feel like it's much harder to earn the respect of your team like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and I don't know about you, but I'm curious your thoughts on this. But there was definitely a time when, the generalist who, can design a database from scratch and does it with, perfect execution, and has everything dialed in. And but also can program, but also knows about DevOps, and also, does all these different things. I felt like there was at least one point in the last 10 years where just sharpshooters, that's all anybody wanted. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on if that's changed, reaching out to all these leaders about the more kind of generalist where you can shapeshift to whatever the burning problem is because you have that background.
Um,
um,
yeah, I think it has changed a lot. I was fortunate to work at startups where I was always known as like sort of the Swiss Army knife. I prefer the term like Apache helicopter, but I'll take the Swiss Army knife. But I do remember, especially like interviewing with like big tech companies, like they did not like the generalists, right? They wanted
no,
sharpshooters, right? So they were like,
absolutely.
so wait a second, you're a product manager, but you're a front end developer and a back end developer, and you're a solutions architect, and you have marketing background, and it was
Yeah.
like that. I remember thinking, why is that a bad thing? Like, wouldn't I be better as a product manager if I actually understood what's under the hood and like how things work? And then on the flip side, wouldn't I be a better engineer if I've run
Yeah.
product and worked with sales? So to answer your
Right.
question, that all the engineering leaders I speak to now, they're hiring generalists. They're looking for
Mhm.
people that, and not even just technical generalists, but people that might be a software developer that used to work in sales or used to work in legal or used to work in marketing or, customer support or something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because then they bring that lens and expertise,
Right.
to product development.
And that comes down to talking about what makes a good team, right? And I think I might get it wrong, but I believe it was Google did, this multi-million dollar study because they had certain teams, everyone was a PhD, everyone was like, top of their class, and that team was not delivering. And then they would have this other team, it was like a hodgepodge group of, who knows what, and they didn't think that they would be doing much, but they nailed it.
And why do you think that
And
is? The diversity in thinking, the diversity in backgrounds, the diversity in
yeah,
mindset.
so
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess, well, the study cost millions. So they, unpacked everything, did all the data analytics, did, interviews to the nth degree. And once they came back, it was determined that there were a couple different things that they saw from a high functioning team versus those that weren't. And it was not, let's say, what many people think of as diversity, which might be, where you're from, what language you speak, that sort of thing. Because honestly, they could have all gone to the same school and studied under the same professor and all have the same view, right?
Right.
Like if they all went to Harvard and studied under, John Smith, that's not diversity.
Right.
But if we bring in people from who have many different backgrounds, like you were saying, like support different aspects like that, completely different, studied music, that kind of thing, it brings a new dynamic to the pot that the team has, and it can actually just enhance everybody's work. The second thing was, to have psychological security in the team. That was a big thing. So people could speak up and not feel like they were going to get, have an idea. And even if they tried that idea, they would not be reprimanded for, doing an idea that didn't work. So that psychological safety, that net was a big component, and everyone able to be at the table and speak freely. So it wasn't like a hierarchy. It was more of like a round table. Everybody gets to speak.
Yeah.
And they supported that.
That's
That
super
was the,
important because, if you don't have that, you might miss out on a lot of opportunities, right? There might be, people in a meeting that, there's always the people who are doing all the talking, right? And then, the person with the best solution might be the one who's too afraid to speak up for whatever reason, right?
exactly. Exactly. And if one person's doing all the talking, we're basically a team of one,
Right.
right?
Yep, exactly.
So it's not really effective at all.
No.
And yeah, so you kind of have to go with that mindset that, yeah, it's all the catalysts, in the petri dish, and creating that, special sauce that is going to land you where you need to be. And covering blind spots, right? Like we all have blind spots, but if we're collectively from different backgrounds, disciplines, have different things that we value, like you're saying, like support values different things than, let's say, AI engineer,
Right.
which is somebody who has a legal background, right? They have
Yeah.
very different things that, decides their success, or, that they're, secure about. So putting those all into the mix is a great win. So yeah, it was an interesting kind of case study if you ever want to
Yeah,
dive into
for
it.
sure. I've heard similar stories and I've had similar experiences on both sides where it was like, all right, we have too many Stanford MBAs or CS people here. Like we need to bring in some new thinking. But pivoting a little bit, so hard to talk to an engineering leader now without talking about AI tooling. So my question is about tools like Copilot and Cursor and Windsurf. How do you think engineering leaders should be thinking about productivity metrics with all these tools sort of skyrocketing in usage?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is, security. Are you partnering with a third party, and do you know where that data is going, right? So if your engineers are using, some sort of copilot, where does that data go? And like, is it hosted locally somewhere, or are they sending it to the cloud? And then you get into privacy concerns, and once data is out, it's out. So that's one of my major concerns about using, let's say, a cloud-based tool, even if it's free, and usually it would be, to, add the capability of like, oh, my team's able to code faster. Well, that's great. But, if they're also sharing, things that shouldn't be shared, that's a problem. So we need to
Yeah.
think about like the data
What's the
privacy and
opportunity
each.
cost? Yeah.
Exactly. So if you are going to use one of those tools, they have to be assessed, with a fine comb to make sure that, it's something that, you get all the answers from the provider. Like, hey, how long if I make a request, how long does it stay on your servers? Does it go back into your algorithm? Does it, and any of those questions that pop up are going to be important to understand as a leader, because you never want to, see some sort of secretive data or sensitive data being shared through one of those tools. So, that's kind of my like, I think they're great. Don't get me wrong, but it's like you got to just do it right and watch out for and then be able to trust the partner you're working with. And if you don't, maybe there's another solution. Maybe they have an opportunity to download it on-prem and, it doesn't go back to the mothership at any point. And, that gives your organization solace that, there's no data leaks, things that would be sensitive. But also, so that's one layer. And then another layer is, talking to your team about what is acceptable to be sharing on AI tools. Can I just, throw out, like, can I type in my email, like the email I just wrote to this client, which has sensitive information? Can I just throw it into a model so it sounds better? Or, what's the process that we as a company have decided on? Because that can be very challenging. Every company, I mean, there's a reason why companies are successful is because of the intellectual property they have. So it's important to defend it and at the very least have a nice process for it.
And going into sort of leadership philosophy, so you've worked in everything from scrappy startups to enterprise infrastructure. What's one belief you had early on that you've changed your mind about?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't think I was prepared for this one. So,
Even better.
um, yeah, no, it's great. So, um, there's a few givens that I just thought would work. Mostly around the business side of things. You can release something, and if it's good, the world's going to know about it. It's not necessarily the truth, right?
Right.
Like there's so many forces that could come into play. Um, Whether it's like, well, you didn't spend money on marketing and you need to do that, but also maybe there's a big player who's kind of taking the reins of what you're doing and making sure that you don't succeed. It gets it's warfare out there. So that's why it's kind of nice sometimes to work in an area where they don't have too many of that. But yeah, that was one thing that like hit me hard. I did not. I just thought making a great product would equal great success.
Right. Yeah.
That that definitely does not happen. You can make the best damn product out there, and that's really frustrating.
I,
And from an engineering side, it's not like you failed. You put your heart and soul into it, and it is the best thing on the market, but the market isn't capable of receiving it. So frustrating. Because I always think like most engineers, well, at least mine, right? It's like our dream is that our moms and aunts, uncles, grandmas, grandpas can use it, right?
right.
And they think it's right, and you're there. They're like, "Whoa, you made that! That's so great!" Or just to see somebody on the street, or to be walking around town and seeing your technology. That's really what it's about. So anytime that's somehow mitigated, can be very crushing for some engineers like myself. But yeah, but the idea is that you try to look at a situation and make sure that that's not going to happen, and you learn from from mistakes, right? Always. So
Yeah, I think, one of the key themes is you probably learn a lot more from your mistakes than you do from your successes, right?
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's why we like, engineers with 20 years of experience, because that person has made so many mistakes.
Yeah.
But they also have gotten frustrated with themselves. They've gotten frustrated with the applications they built because they built them, and then they got this really bad tech debt, and they want to make new things, but all day they're spending, fixing up, what they should have done the first time, right? So it's that type of learning that's important for experience. But
So I want to ask you about staying sharp as an engineering leader with technological advancement at an unprecedented speed, and the news cycles reflect that. It's like, I feel like every day there's some major tech announcement, if not multiple. How do you stay sharp as an engineering leader in that world? Specific habits, routines? Just curious.
yeah, I mean, try to take in the current news. A couple things that I follow, both AI related, software related, tech stacks that we have enveloped. I make sure that I'm receiving their newest and latest amendments and new features. That's important. And then but it's not all tech, right? So I've got magazine subscription to MIT Review, Harvard Business Review, and all, to kind of supplement, from a high level, what the market is doing or what other people are doing, which really helps, because just because you have a problem doesn't mean that it's going to be solved by, the exact fit that fixes the problem. So you kind of have to branch out, and you have to look at, like, what's agriculture doing right now? I don't work in agriculture, but maybe they're doing something really cool and I can apply it to a problem that I'm working on, maybe, right? So
Yeah.
you just have to kind of have an open mind about, especially with AI, because AI is it's a creative discipline, but essentially it is the same game for a lot of things, but it's applied in many different ways. And that creativity of, like, oh, we found this data point that we never thought about, and that makes you think about, well, what data points don't I think about?
Right.
And then you can add it to your model, and suddenly it starts clicking. So yeah, those are kind of the ways. And yeah, as far as other things in the world, from a regulation standpoint, because I know that's a hot topic with AI, in GDPR and all these, kind of, we're not immune to it, and it's only going to get more and more regulated, which is, it's a good thing, in my opinion. Just to put guardrails on things so we all know we're rowing in the same direction. But yeah, like, those are really messy. They're always coming out. And yeah, my fiance works in as a chief technology officer for a law firm, and she's trying to take these from a global standpoint and put them together to share with her team. So yeah, she's got a much harder job than I do, I think. But but so usually I also listen to her, to be like, what's coming down the pipe? Oh, okay, all right, and kind of.
Interesting household with two CTOs. It must
Yeah.
be interesting dinner conversations. Last question: what advice would you give engineering leaders under pressure to do something with AI without a clear roadmap? I feel like this is a pretty common thing over the past couple years.
Yeah, I think you just have to give it a shot. You won't do it perfect, and that's a guarantee. You're never going to do something perfect the first time. So don't expect that it does that. Also, I wouldn't say that it has to solve everything. Like, it's not like a model that's going to go and, like, fix your finances and do customer support and do this other thing and this other thing. Like, just start small. And maybe it's a classification system that just kind of helps unblock something and helps work move forward faster. That would be a good start. and that's pretty low risk. But you'd also obviously like kind of use kind of like staging environments, right? To prove that it's going to work and get feedback uh, from your employees, because it can be scary if you're gonna launch a new AI tool, and you're in a larger company. A lot of people are going to take that as like, oh, like this is not good. Like I don't like this technology. I've done this for ages. I'm so good at it. How dare you?
Right.
Right. By bringing them in and actually sitting them down with the AI engineers and saying like, how can we build this with your mind so that we make it right? And they can kind of like walk in their shoes, and I think over time you'll see that kind of the subject matter experts become really good at distilling their processes and being able to put those into AI models, which drives, and instead of being able to do 10 things per day or 100 things per day, the model that person helped create can do 10,000 things or 100,000 things, but it's their mind, it's their ideas, but they have to have trust that that is there, and they have to see the feedback. So it's really important that when you're building that model, you share it with them and say, you know here's what I built, here's the outputs, here's the explainability, through whether it's SHAP or Lime or something like that, some sort of metric to show, well, half of it was based on this, 20% was based on this. And if they agree with that, then you're good to go. If they say, actually, 50% is based on, that, no, that's not what goes through my mind. So then we need to go and change the model. So like that explainability is really important for those subject matter experts. But I would also say like it's important for everybody. Like every model needs XAI to really like show what's happening under the hood, because it's not magic.
Right.
It's math. So as long as our math is right, and we're using the right parameters that make the difference. And, we've done some feature engineering and all those things. We should be good. So yeah, just bringing people in from the onset and kind of bring them along for the journey.
Way to bring it back to the beginning. John, thanks for coming on the show and joining us on Tech Teams today, sharing your take on what it really means to scale with speed and trust in the AI era. For listeners, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Tech Teams today for weekly conversations with engineering leaders. See you next time.